Okay, my friends, another shocker du jour, and this one here, I've talked about this a number of times, is Quetzalcoatl. He's on the east coast of the United States, and his body runs all the way up the east coast of the United States up to Canada. This is additionally his body, I believe, runs all the way up. It's too much of a coincidence that it would follow that. But this is the feathered pattern at the tips of his back. Now let me show you something here. This is Quetzalcoatl in the ancient texts. They showed him looking just like this, way up at the end, having all that feathery looking stuff, and feathers coming out of his head, beard coming down, and eating giants. Now, this thing was the size of half of the United States. How could he possibly, were the people that size? Why would they draw it like that? This is what's got me perplexed. And here he is right here. That's Quetzalcoatl. And here he is eating a guy that's as big as his head, bigger than his head. Now, I'm going to show you a spot right up here on Google Earth where it shows the feathers and you cannot miss it. So let's go back to Quetzalcoatl, and there's his feathered serpent body. Runs all the way up. And you can follow it. I mean, it's not hard to follow. It's very simple, as a matter of fact. And here's his beards. There's one beard. There's another one. The color of the outline here is because this has got something to do with the bodily tissue that was here is not the same as what's running off here, creating nice, very green stuff. And I'm going to show you right up here. Let's dig right into his feathers, because he has all feathers coming up here, as you saw. Look, and you can see this would be the outline of his feathered area. So can we find any feathers that we can really be sure of? Yes, we absolutely can. Let's take a look at these two right here. Those are feathers. That's what a feather stalk looks like. Same as that one over here. See? Now, I have some giant feathers here, and not this big, but pretty big. Now, that's his headdress. And this whole thing right here was his headdress. Just exactly what it shows in the text. He's identical to what they showed. Identical. No difference whatsoever. And this, of course, is his throat. And you see all this little snaky looking stuff? I figured out what that is. That's because when he died, all the fluids in his body just sort of congealed, looking for a way to go, and they just kept working their way. And the same thing happened on the edge of his nose, all around here. All the water, the fluids ran off, and they collected in little puddles, and then they all turned into one little tiny river system. Look at this. This really perplexed me for a long time. You see these little loopy rivers? They're all on the edge of his nose, all the way down, everywhere. And I thought to myself, how the hell did that happen? And this is what happened. They sort of drifted down, all of the skin and tissue and stuff started collecting, and they made it into puddles and pools, and then eventually they all had to get out of there, and they figured a way out was to form this little network and drain out. I mean, that's to me, this is fascinating stuff. And again, here's his whole body running all the way up. These are all feathers. These are all feathers. These are feathers too. You know, they're not quite as obvious, but you can see the pattern is running continuously from this creature's body all the way up. And as far as I'm concerned, if you could follow this little green line here, we're still into his body, or into his feathers anyway. Now, does it go all the way up to here? as they say in Quebec, je ne sais pas. I do not know, but it certainly looks like it's headed in that direction. Huge creature. I mean, and again, I have a lot of people talk about how could the size of this earth contain these creatures. I do not know. What was the earth like when they were on the earth? I do not know. What did they eat when they were here? Well, it looked like this guy was eating people, but I can't imagine people being that big. I know they were huge. I mean, absolutely gigantic people. Gigantic, much, 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 much bigger than anybody had ever considered. But to have them that big, that a guy could eat a guy that big, and you'd need, you know, that would be a pretty good meal, but I don't know if that would last them for forever. I mean, that's a pretty good lunch. That's easy. But you ever see some of those snakes? They could eat an antelope. Just take the whole antelope, and goes right into their gut, and then of course digest it. Anyway, to me, this is it can't be denied anymore. And I have the giants here in my own property. I don't know if I talked to you about this or not, but I'm going to do it again if I did already. That's a fingertip. This is, follow my cursor. This is the fingernail. This little pad right here is what racks up against your other bone behind it. These are the blood supplies. I broke this piece off next to the fingernail so that I could get down inside to get blood, which I did, and the blood came out, and it was excellent quality. And that pad comes off just like that, it really does. This is just like a pad. And it's still got the sweat pores and the fingerprints and everything on here. My thumb is the size of one of these finger ridges. And it's 3 feet long. The fingertip itself is 3 feet long. From here to here is 3 feet. Then I also have this hand, and that finger was DNA tested human. This hand was DNA tested human as well. And that's a left hand, and that's the tendon you have in your left hand. And this is the pad that runs around to your little finger out this way. That's a little cleave in between. If you squint your palm together, you'll see there's a little cleave in between this pad and that pad. This is the grip skin, which is like that one I broke off of the gigantic fingertip. This one here is a much smaller hand. It's still giant. It's 4 feet wide. But the other fingertip itself was 3 feet long, just the fingertip. And this is the grip skin on this finger, on this hand. And they all have it. Your fingertips, your hands, your feet, your toes, wherever you make that really serious contact, you have grip skin. What else? So I showed that, I showed that, I showed that, I showed Quetzalcoatl a couple of times. This is blood coming out of rocks. Very simple to get blood out of rocks. And they have this same, because they were body parts, they have the fibrin, which is the clotting fiber, right underneath the scab. And then when you take the scab off, you end up with this, which is the vein, the black blood, and the artery, which is the red blood, out of these holes. And these are what bring blood from bone to bone through these little foramens. And blood supplies, nerves, all that stuff. It still has the cartilage on it. And they get preserved because of the membranes. The membranes are what make them get preserved. What else do we have here? The feather, I think I showed you the feather. No, actually, maybe not. That's the feather that Greg Morrison sent me. Actually, a piece of that feather. I have it here somewhere. Here it is. That feather right there. You see that? One side, just like a turkey feather. See the color? The other side, same color. Well, a little darker. And that's what that feather is the side of the feather. This feather, like that feather there, you can't even measure it. There's almost nothing there. This is about 3 inches, 3 inches thick. Now, I'm going to look at this feather in the microscope, because this part here is the tiniest little bit of the feather. You see where I'm looking now? What we're going to be looking at is in each one of these little bitty things makes a feather. It's not one big flat plate, and you can all separate them out. That's what we're going to be looking at. It's a separation between. They'll come apart, but they like glue each other with this little fuzzy strip, and I'll show you that fuzzy strip. It's very, very cool. So we're going to be looking at that right there, and here it is up in the microscope. And that's that fuzzy little strip. You see? And they go, that's that little tiny piece, and then the fuzzy strips glue them together. And like I showed you, I open them up, I can see you can separate them. And then when they snip back together, that like Velcros the little bits back together again. Really very interesting. And that's all this is right here, is those little gluey parts. Little bitty parts, like up there. That's all that is. So that feather was pretty good size. Alright, you see where I'm focusing in here? I'm focusing in on this spot, not on the main spot. I'm focusing in on the little tiny fluty bits. And those little tiny fluty bits are what you're looking at right there. These here are off of the edge, and here it is in the microscope. That's the fluty little bits that we're looking at in my microscope. And it's also the fluty little bits that we're looking at in that gigantic feather that's on the side of the road. Alright, they are the tiniest little bits and pieces of here. And that is what we're looking at there. You see how they have like a little ridge, and then they have little fuzzy things. These little fuzzy things like stick, they're little sticky fuzzy things that stick these feathers together. That'll separate out. I think maybe I can separate it. Hold on. Hold on, let me get a separation going here. Alright. That's how, if you take a feather and separate it apart, alright, this is why they stick together, and they have all these tiny pieces. That's what sticks them together. And then if I lift this up a little bit and we come over, we can come right over here, you see? That's the main shaft. This is hard to do. And each one of those little fluty jobbers comes out, and what we're looking at, the stuff that I showed you here, is the fluty part. It's not the main stalk. And that's one of the pieces of the fluty part right there. And I think I measured it out to be about 3 inches thick. So that's pretty thick. And it sure looks like it's a turkey color to me. So, very similar. Anyway, that's what we got. Very interesting. Caesar is thinking, holy smokes. Ooh, look at that guy. He must be scared to death. Don't worry, Caesar. He's no problem, buddy. Look at his feathers here. Now, he died in the Great Flood, too. They all died in the Great Flood, it looks like to me. Now, I don't know about all the Quetzalcoatl and all the rest of them. I have no idea. These are the kind of things that intrigue me, but I really don't have the answers. I got to be perfectly honest. they're on the surface of the earth. That thing is above the earth. It's not buried deep or anything. All the stuff I have just I picked up off the ground. I didn't, well, I dig it. They did a little work here. They added an office at my house. And when they did, they just dug a very small, not even deep for foundation. And out came the hand and the fingers and all that stuff came out of that. So those are real mud fossils. The rest of my stuff was basically like real hard stone. It wasn't buried in the mud, so it must have been above the ground. That's all I can think. And we have a lot of stuff. And I have a bunch of people working with me. Greg Morrison did most of this stuff with it. As a matter of fact, he's the one that found the feathers. And I think he also sent me this, which was a dragon scale. It's a dragon scale. And you see that right there? That little spot right there is where the muscle, like fiber, tagged right in there. And this thing could rock around, sliding up and down in its holder, basically. And this would have been like a hinge right here. You see how? See how many layers that dragon scale has? They're all built that way. They have like a bazillion different layers. Anyway, this, you know, all I can say is things are much different than they told me. And we can get blood out of rocks all day long. Here's one that just a scab came out of it. And right under the scab, the same thing that you have, the fibrin comes, which is the clotting fiber that seals you between the scab and the raw blood underneath, so it seals it. And then after that, I remove that part, and you come right here with the red and the black. You see, this is the black, and that's actually the vein. This is the red, and that's actually the artery. You have to have blood running between your bones, and you know, through they call these bones foramen. And there's blood supplies, there's nerves, there's all kinds of things run through these little cavities. They're cavities like this, similar to that. These are like ligaments and so forth, and places where they attach to, like another bone. I think it's something like this. And then these probably had blood supplies coming up, straight up. And the cartilage is all on here and all that stuff because of the conditions it was in when they petrified. They were what's called mud fossils. Anyway, that's what we're looking at. And Quetzalcoatl is pretty obvious. I just want to be sure I mentioned that was Greg Morrison sent me that feather, the piece of feather, 3 inches thick. I believe there was also Greg that sent me this dragon scale, which would be from a pretty good sized dragon. And that little spot right there is where the muscle would have attached it. And then this right here is the hinge, so that it can twist up and down and slide back and forth in that groove. Now, you see these different, I don't know if you can or not, but there's a bazillion different layers in this. I mean a lot of them. You can't even see it. When you look at it in a microscope, you can see better. But there is a lot of layers. There's blood coming here, and there's blood over here. Everything needs to be serviced with a little bit of blood. This probably didn't take much, because it's pretty much just like a scale. When you get into the muscle and so forth, whole different issue. You got a lot of blood. But that's blood right there. And that's blood right there. And there's a gluey spot right at the bottom here where it looks like it was a slippery gluey spot to the next scale underneath where it could sort of move this way and that way. Anyway, thank you, Greg. You're doing a fabulous job, Greg Morrison. And we have a pretty good crew now. All right, so that's that. Okay, that is the dragon scale. And what we're looking down at is the red spot, which is where the blood is. Now I have to turn the light off. And we're going to look this up in the upper screen here, which right there is where that blood is. Now I'm going to put a little catalase on there and see if we can get a reaction. I'm going to probably have to get way down close. So let me get set up, and then I'm going to get way down close on there. We're going to put a little catalase on that. I haven't tried this yet, and that is the dragon scale. Now there is another spot on it where this is the outlet or the inlet, one or the other. And then there's another spot over here, right there, which is where the inlet or outlet was. It comes in one side and goes out the other. And this is this dragon scale, and there's all these little ridges in it. And I just put a little moisture on here. It's already dried up. And right at the very end here, right there, that tip, that's where it attaches to the next scale. That little flap right there. You see the little circle right at the very end? Right up there at the very end. Right there, that's where it tabs in. All right, and that's where, right that very tip at the very end. And that's like a little hinge. All right, so now let's see if we can get a catalase reaction. Because if we get catalase, there's still some viable, I would say some viable DNA probably in there. Now, when I said there could be some DNA in there, not something you could use to make more dragons or something like that. It should have some polypeptides in there. Now, I am going to try to put some catalase on here, some hydrogen peroxide. Now, if there's any bubbling, it'll indicate that there is some catalase reacting, and I can see it already. Hold on. This is right up here is what we're looking at, where I put the hydrogen peroxide. You see the bubbling? See that bubbling? That indicates that there is a biological activity going on there. Alright, that's it from that dragon scale. And that'll continue to bubble until all the hydrogen peroxide has been converted to water. H2O2 is hydrogen peroxide. H2O is water. It releases the oxygens as those bubbles. And that is a biological attack against a reactive oxygen species. Alright, so I guess that's enough for the dragon scale, but don't forget, that's the little tab right there that would lock this in position. And this is the hinge so that it can float up and down, because it's just a solid block. And they come in all these different little layers. You see all those layers? And that's what gives them their strength. And that was where we were looking at the catalase reaction. And then this is the other side where the blood also filters through here. Now everything has blood. Even the feathers. Now, even like this feather here, I couldn't find the blood. I'm looking for blood in this thing everywhere. I was looking, I looked, I looked, I looked, and I finally found a spot right there. It looks like somehow it had some blood came into this feather right in that spot. Your feathers don't have much blood. I mean, they just don't have blood. But there has to be something that feeds a little tiny bit of blood, and I believe that's where it was. Let's take a look at it in a microscope. Okay, it was blood. You see where I am right there on the side of that feather? That's the only spot I could find that had blood in it, and there it is right there. Hold on, let me turn the lights off and we'll do a little closer investigation. Okay, there it is. There's the tiniest little bit of blood. This is all that feathery little fluty stuff that grabs into the rest of the stuff. There's a tiniest little bit of blood that is servicing this feather. See, now, don't forget, this is the only spot that I could find. And that's where it is right there on that feather. That one little bitty tiny spot right up here. Right there. That's what we're looking at. And not one other place could I find any red blood. Well, actually, maybe there is a little tiny bit there. I have to look that. But I mean, I looked around, I didn't see any. That one little spot was the only one I could find. Other than that, all this is that fluty looking stuff that grabs the other feathers. It's a pretty good sized feather. Okay, this is crazy. This just came in from a friend, Dina Smith, and she said, take a look at this. They're asking for comments on this area that I always talk about, which is where Quetzalcoatl is. So I come up here and I look at it, and sure enough, and here's the, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, but it's Dutch Sanzi. That's about as close as I'm going to get. But I guess he goes by the name of Dutch. Now, I'm also very interested in these earthquakes, which I guess this is his main situation, is doing earthquakes. And but he also did this where he's talking about these star forts. And they're right on the river. And they're right up in this area, which I'll show you, is on the back of Quetzalcoatl's head. And I started looking at it, and it really intrigues me. I'm going to show you. Now, here's the key. Here's what he's talking about. There's an area here that he saw on these ancient old maps that showed they were going to construct a fort here, or they did construct it here. Now, this is what I found very interesting, is that this river runs down through this area here in Missouri, and then comes down here, and look at this. It comes down, and then it merges, like sort of twists around into the back of Quetzalcoatl's head. This is the back of Quetzalcoatl's head. Now, what is going on here? Is it just merging there because it had nowhere else to go? Let's look at this now. Here's Quetzalcoatl. All right, here he is. This is the back of his head. It runs around like this. His body comes down this way. What is that doing coming into the back of his head? You see it? Now, they always build where there's a lot of nutrients, basically. That's where you see a lot of development. And that's why up in here there must have been a lot of nutrition up in this area. What it was, I don't know, but I'm going to tell you what. There's very little question in my mind that you can just dismiss this as being Quetzalcoatl. I showed the hair, the feathers. I mean, it's literally just, there's no question they're feathers. I mean, if you could dispute that, I'd like to have somebody go and ask us, an avian person that knows about feathers, if those are feathers or not. They are feathers. Let's just get past this. What's the deal? What are we going to do about it? I don't know. These are his feathers up here in the Green Mountains. They sell feather meal. They grind up feathers to make things grow green. You don't get much greener than that. Now, again, I don't know what to make of this, but it certainly changes things. I don't know if ignorance is bliss. Well, people can just forget about it. But I'm looking at the whole thing differently now. I don't know what to make of it. I got to be perfectly honest with you. But it's remarkable.